Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Doug Smith, and this is the 14th video in the series we are calling the Opioid Monologues. More specifically, this is the last video in the first half of the Opioid Monologues. The first half of the video series is to lay out and in detail what actually happened to the individual in this opioid crisis. The second half of the Opioid Monologues is to lay out what actually happened to our nation during this opioid crisis. Okay? In the first half of the series, and as we are discussing the impact on the individual, we have seen how the diagnosis of opioid addiction is without supporting scientific evidence. Instead, we have seen and in detail that the opioids are just simply a defective product. This defective product was pushed out and onto an unknowing population and with deceptive advertising. This defective product, called the opioids, then caused a mass methylation of the DNA in those individuals exposed long enough. Once methylated, the individual experienced autonomic conflict and with a loss of control of the internal organs when opioid abstinence was attempted. This autonomic conflict and with the loss of control of the internal organs could not be long endured by humans. Most would eventually buy and consume an often illegal opioid just to temporarily escape this horrendous condition. Buprenorphine puts an end to this horrific cycle, but buprenorphine has been tied up with political parlor tricks, apparently in an attempt to maximize revenue and profits for the methadone clinics. It's all there and then some in the previous videos. In the last video, we acknowledged to our community leaders that when we took the diagnosis of opioid addiction off the table, we took away a simplistic view of the opioid crisis. We recognized we needed to supply an equally simple way of viewing and approaching this problem if we're going to make progress in bringing this opioid crisis to a conclusion. And we gave an excellent and simple way to view this opioid crisis. The opioids are just a defective product. It's that simple. This is just product defect. And with a poisoning to the DNA called methylation, okay, this stuff isn't really that hard, okay? And this wasn't mass addiction. This is mass methylation or toxicity to the DNA of those exposed. We even went further and shared the strong similarities between the mass methylation caused by the opioids and the mass methylation caused by cigarette smoking. When you get right down to it, the opioids are just as defective, just as toxic, just as poisonous to our bodies as are the cigarettes. In fact, when you really get down to the genetic level, the mechanism of poisoning by the opioids is identical to the mechanism of poisoning by which the cigarettes cause lung cancer. Remember, we saw them both. We saw the methylation of the CPG island within the promoter region of the gene and with gene silencing. This isn't a similar comparison between the opioids and tobacco. This is an identical comparison between the opioids and tobacco. And now that we understand how simple and straightforward this can all be, then designing a workflow to rescue and maintain those who have become poisoned is an easier task. Okay? This isn't hard. Our organization, CES, has been out there on the front lines and with telemedicine buprenorphine for over 4 years. Okay? These people aren't out there craving to get high. That was an absolutely ridiculous concept pushed by the experts at ASAM and SAMHSA. These people are desperate to get stabilized and to get stabilized on 16 milligrams a day of buprenorphine, the blockade level. Will they need additional support and counseling? Absolutely. And we are bringing this additional support and counseling to them in a really fantastic manner. By the way, one of the long-term needs of the support and counseling is the anger and bitterness that develops when the people realize that they are not an opioid addict and this whole thing was a toxicity to their DNA. And they are furious at the experts at ASAM and SAMHSA. Remember, these people were even forced to stand up in required meetings and say, "Hello, my name is Bill, and I'm an opioid addict." And now they find out that this is not true? Part of their healing is to get these experts out of their lives and begin a journey of forgiveness and healing. these ASAM and SAMHSA experts are actually viewed as an oppressor. These experts are viewed in the same light as a victim of a violent crime views their offender. Bottom line to the community leaders, be careful. Keeping these experts around, be careful. These experts may hinder the effort to heal within the community. Just be aware of that. Okay, let's get to work. Okay, let's lay out a scalable plan for how we end this opioid crisis. And it's the same plan whether we are talking about a community, a state, or an entire nation. To begin, it's important for the community leaders to recognize a shift in the thinking. Remember the old, flawed model of opioid addiction? The thinking, as ridiculous as it now sounds, is that the afflicted were just craving to get high. That the incredible bliss due to the surge of dopamine was so reinforcing that these people would do anything to return to that state of bliss. But the reality, as we now understand it to be, is that the afflicted were suffering from autonomic conflict and with a loss of control of the internal organs, a state of absolute torture beyond anything Mother Nature had ever intended. These people were not running towards something blissful. They were running away from something horrific. See, we're trying to understand how something called pathological consumption. We're trying to understand how pathological consumption occurred. The consumption of the opioids was pathological because it was occurring consistently despite very negative consequences, such as legal consequences, employment, financial, relationship, family issues. But in order to bring an end to this opioid crisis, we must first stop believing the fairy tale that the afflicted are chasing a high and start recognizing the reality that the afflicted is trying to survive and escape a horrific condition known as autonomic conflict, and with a loss of control of the internal organs. Once we make this shift in thinking, then the concept of rescue and maintenance, okay, that's our strategy. Rescue and maintenance, okay? That's our strategy, and it's been working fantastic, okay? We've been doing this. Rescue and maintenance with buprenorphine and support through counseling, and all through telemedicine, okay? And in real time, 24/7. See, the World Health Organization recommends that treatment be readily available. Now, we support this readily available concept by being available for registration 24/7. It's something we've learned. Okay. Now, let's look at what we have learned from being out on the front lines for years and with telemedicine with buprenorphine. We have learned that about 4 out of 5 of the people joining us for treatment, 4 out of 5 became methylated due to treatment for a painful medical condition. In other words, they were prescribed the opioids. There was no warning given about the possible methylation. There was no informed consent. These are true victims of a defective product. And we've learned that maybe about 1 out of 5 of our people became methylated due to substance abuse. Okay, these are the people who really pursue altered states of consciousness, okay, especially if they can pass out or fall down. Many of these people will take whatever is available. And it was the increased availability of the opioids at the community level that led to the additional number of methylated in each community. Okay, but here's the bottom line. Mother Nature doesn't care. Mother Nature doesn't care what your intent may have been. She doesn't care if you were taking the opioids because of pain or taking the opioids to get high. Okay, Mother Nature doesn't care. If you took enough opioids and for long enough, you became methylated. Once you became methylated, we begin to see this pathological consumption of the opioids. Okay, at this point, it can be really hard to distinguish between those who became methylated due to a painful medical condition and those who became methylated due to substance abuse. They all kind of blur together in a near daily pursuit of enough opioid to stave off the horror of withdrawal and with autonomic conflict and loss of control of the internal organs. They will buy what is available and affordable. Pills, heroin, fentanyl, it's all the same. They know the risk of death from a hot dose of fentanyl, but they are driven to escape unimaginable agony and they will take the risk. They will do just about anything and for a few hours of relief from an unimaginable torture due to a loss of control of the internal organs. And this cycle of pathological consumption can go on and on and on and on. There are really only 2 ways out for most people, death or treatment with medication. Okay, the 2 available medications today are buprenorphine and methadone. Now remember, we don't believe in the full agonist methadone. Why would you ever use or promote methadone as first-line therapy now that buprenorphine is available? Doesn't make sense. So in our view, there are two ways out of this pathological consumption: death or buprenorphine. That's how we see it, and that's what we've been doing. And the results have been fantastic. Now, before we get deeper into this rescue and maintenance, let's spend a bit more time on this concept of substance abuse. See, this is where the experts got confused. Substance abuse is a risk factor for some of the people who became methylated. And the experts got confused, and instead of some of the people having substance abuse, they just labeled everyone as being an opioid addict. And they did a lot of damage in the process. And they greatly prolonged the opioid crisis. But let me share something with our community leaders. This substance abuse group, okay, we have learned that even when they have access to buprenorphine, the substance abuse behavior will continue in some. These are people who will stop their buprenorphine to get high on heroin. They will abuse Xanax, they will abuse crystal meth, they will abuse cocaine, but fortunately, these are a small minority. But remember, we are first off treating them for the effects of the consequences of their methylation. Treatment of their substance abuse is a separate diagnosis and a separate treatment and will require additional resources. And a certain number of these people with true substance abuse are ultimately going to die from their substance abuse. And that is just a reality, and it's a fact of life. This was true before this opioid crisis began, and it will continue to be true. Fortunately, the vast majority of the people with access to buprenorphine just go back to their normal lives that they were leading before this whole awful episode occurred. They go back to work. They go back to their families. They have no intentions of ever touching an opioid again, or any other drug for that matter. They just need access to buprenorphine. So, temper your expectations on the substance abuse crowd. Buprenorphine will give them a second chance following the methylation due to the opioids. But some are going to waste the opportunity and just continue to engage in substance abuse behavior. Buprenorphine treats the genetic damage and prevents the individual from experiencing the withdrawal state, but it's not a miracle pill. It doesn't erase the underlying substance abuse issues. And while we are offering some advice to our community leaders, let me remind our community leaders what we learned back in 2002. Remember this hearing, these transcripts at the DEA back in 2002 on the rescheduling of buprenorphine from a 5 to a 3? And remember this warning from the Rothschild Foundation, warning the DEA of possible conflicts of interest by some of the participants. Remember, we had this law firm, Hogan and Harrison, that was representing someone who didn't want to be identified. But while they didn't want to be identified, they sure wanted to protect the precious and profitable methadone clinics, these OTPs. If protecting the methadone clinics meant denying the people access to the life-saving and life-changing medication that is buprenorphine, then so be it. That's just collateral damage. Okay? And these forces are still with us today, only stronger now. And these groups, ASAM and SAMHSA, they are going to vehemently protect the dual industries of counseling and methadone. So when you as a community leader, when you are confronted by these experts promoting counseling and methadone, just remember the words of the Rothschild Foundation warning of possible conflicts of interest in those attempting to manipulate and control the situation. We see it every day. Difference is we have learned to recognize the behavior. We have learned to recognize those who are agenda driven. The agenda always being more counseling and more methadone and less buprenorphine. Just keep this foremost in your thoughts. We do. And while we're on the subject of the agenda driven and those with conflicts of interest, let's give a special warning to those states that will soon be seeing money from some of the opioid lawsuits, some of these settlements. We are aware most, if not all, of these states have committees already in place for the distribution of these funds. And we are aware of the probability and the reality that these committees are stacked with the ASAM and SAMHSA types. So here's a word of advice to the community leaders, particularly the governors and the state attorney generals. We will be watching. okay, and we will be auditing. If money is appropriated for counseling and methadone, okay, and not buprenorphine, we will consider that money wasted. Our people are the victims of a defective product that damaged their DNA. The proper treatment is buprenorphine. This buprenorphine needs to be subsidized. It's that simple. Okay, let's jump into the heart of the subject here. How do we get the methylated, the afflicted, off this cycle of pathological consumption and onto a pathway of stabilization and through the process we call rescue and maintenance? How do we accomplish this? How do we do this? Okay, simple. Awareness. It's that simple. Awareness. Okay? For example, awareness can be accomplished just by sending out a series of emergency text messages. We did this. It worked. It worked great. Okay? And we know in every community the sheriff has access to emergency test broadcasting. That's all you need. You send out a text in your community that treatment through telemedicine and with buprenorphine is available, and that's about all you need to do. We can handle it from there. Okay, we are able to be accessed 24/7. People can get to us 24/7. They can become part of our program 24/7. We quickly get these people stabilized on buprenorphine. We handle the rescue and maintenance. Okay, and this is what we have been doing, and we can do this in your community also. All that stated, let me tell you what we've really learned, that for our uninsured people, we need access to free buprenorphine. We'll be talking about this more in future videos, but this is the key to stabilizing the entire community and with access to medication, this free medication. Our people with insurance and Medicaid, they're good, they're covered. It's the uninsured that suffer. Okay, now, let's take a moment and let's look at 3 possible scenarios for a community. First, the community that does not embrace telemedicine with buprenorphine and for rescue and maintenance. You may still be continuing to rely upon the old models of methadone and counseling-based programs that do not incorporate buprenorphine. Your community is going to look like this, pretty much the same as it does now. Plenty of people still stuck in the cycle of pathological consumption. Demand for heroin, fentanyl, and illegal opioids will remain high. The crimes associated with these drugs will remain high. Overdose deaths will remain high. The availability of opioids at the community level will remain high. More of your substance abuse people will become methylated. Nothing really changes. Now, let's compare that to a community that half-heartedly embraces telemedicine with buprenorphine and for rescue and maintenance. Okay, we see a fewer people in the cycle of pathological consumption, but we still see some people participating in pathological consumption. This means there will still be the demand for heroin, fentanyl, and illegal opioids. Okay, this means the associated crimes will still be present. Overdoses will still be occurring. The availability of the opioids in the community will remain an issue, and some of the substance abuse crowd will still be becoming methylated. Okay, there was some change, but not enough. Now, let's look at a community that fully embraces telemedicine with buprenorphine and for rescue and maintenance. This community is really involved. Even the hospital emergency department and the jail are finally serving a role. And now what do we see? We see very few, if any, people participating in pathological consumption. We see the demand for heroin, fentanyl, and illegal opioids falls dramatically. We see the supply of these dangerous substances dry up in the community. We see the crime going down. Okay? We see the overdoses dropping. We see a community that is putting the opioid crisis into the rearview mirror, and it's not that hard to do. Telemedicine can deliver and sustain the rescue and maintenance that is required to return a community to normal. And that's it. That's all there is to it. Okay? We have returned our communities to normal through telemedicine with buprenorphine. Okay, wow. We did it. We have just completed the first half of the Opioid Monologues. It is our hope that people will get something out of the time invested to watch this series. My thanks to James Cotton, our videographer. My thanks to Joe Hill, who helped build this whiteboard. My thanks to Jose Lara, our IT genius. Okay, Jose and I have been working together for almost 20 years. My thanks to the simply incredible team at CES who have pioneered telemedicine with buprenorphine and across this great country and have impacted so many lives. My name is Dr. Doug Smith, and these are the Opioid Monologues. Thank you.